Cossacks are the best light troops among all that exist. If I had them in my army, I would go through all the world with them. That's what Napoleon Bonaparte, a man who struck fear into entire nations, once said about the Cossacks. Even he understood that there are warriors who cannot be tamed, bought, or forced to serve against their will. But the Cossacks were no ordinary soldiers. They were famed for their love of freedom, lived by their own rules, refused to submit to any Tsar, and chose their leaders themselves. This is Slavic. Here we talk about Slavs, and today you'll learn who the Cossacks were and how they became the freest and most fearsome force on the borders of Europe. So, what are the origins of the Cossacks? In the 14th and 15th centuries, the territory of modern-day Ukraine lay at the crossroads of several rival powers: the Tsardom of Moscow, the Ottoman Empire and its vassal, the Crimean Khanate, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and the Kingdom of Poland. Large areas of the borderlands remained uninhabited because no authority was able to guarantee safety in these regions. Raids and looting could come from any direction, especially from the south. None of the competing powers was able to fully establish control over these lands. Brave and daring people saw an opportunity in this unique situation. They quickly realized that in these lands it was possible to live a truly free life, without kings, tsars, or sultans. There was no need to pay tribute to anyone. All that mattered was the ability to defend yourself, your family, and your land. People settled in a way that made their homes resemble small fortresses. As the number of these settlements grew, the people began to interact, cooperate, and unite. Over time, this led to the formation of an entire Cossack state, known in history as the Zaporizhian Sich. Among the Cossacks, leadership was chosen at the General Assembly. The head of a settlement or a group of settlements was called an ataman. He was elected only for a limited term. The ataman was responsible for civil administration and served as a military commander in times of armed conflict. His power was not absolute. If he committed certain offenses, he could not only be removed from office, but also publicly whipped in the town square. Such was their cruel democracy. The Cossacks were deeply religious people. Every home had Christian icons. They followed the commandments, observed fasts, and began every task with a collective prayer. In addition to the Christian commandments, the Cossacks had their own Cossack commandments. This included deep respect for elders, honor toward women, and absolute reverence for guests. The authority of a father and mother was held in such high regard that no important work or major decision would be started without their blessing. Remarkably, this tradition has been preserved in many Cossack patriarchal families to this day. When speaking to parents or to elders in general, Cossacks always showed restraint, politeness, and respect. Cossacks showed the same deep respect toward women. Since a man spent most of his life in service, battles, and military campaigns, his time at home was usually short. That's why all household responsibilities and upbringing of children were managed by his wife, the Cossack woman. We'll talk about the famous wars involving the Cossacks a bit later, but for now, let's continue exploring their daily life. It was strictly taboo to criticize or correct another man's wife, sister, or daughter. Doing so was seen as an insult to the honor of the Cossack, the head of the family. Respect for guests was rooted in the belief that the guest was a messenger of God. The most honored guest was a stranger from distant lands who needed shelter, rest, and care. A person who failed to show respect to a guest was openly condemned. Regardless of the guest's age, they were always given the best seat at the table and the most comfortable place to rest. Even an old man would give up his seat if the guest was younger. The main difference between the Cossacks and ordinary peasants was their unquestionable skill in military service. From a young age, Cossack boys were trained in horseback riding and handling weapons. A Cossack had to be ready for war at any moment. Weapons and war horses were kept at home, so in case of an alarm, Cossacks could gather an armed unit in just a few hours. For a Cossack, his horse was more than just a member of the family. The horse was surrounded by a kind of magical reverence. Before a Cossack went off to war, his wife would first bow to the horse's legs, asking it to protect the rider, and only then bow to his parents, asking them to pray constantly for the warrior's safety. At a Cossack's funeral, his warhorse followed the coffin on its final journey, draped in a black saddle blanket with a Cossack's weapons fastened to the saddle. Only after the horse came the family and loved ones. The main weapons of a Cossack in battle were the shashka and a dagger. Cossacks began learning how to use the shashka from early childhood, and not just the boys. It was perfectly normal for a Cossack woman to know combat techniques as well. Various contests and competitions in swordsmanship were always popular among the Cossacks, giving everyone a chance to show off their skills with cold weapons. These traditions have survived to this day. In modern Ukraine, Cossack culture festivals are still held. They are vibrant events that attract many tourists. The Cossacks in the 14th to 17th centuries were a symbol of freedom, democracy, and a deep desire for an independent life. Cossack lands were constantly growing as people fled from serfdom, both from Russian and Polish territories. The Cossacks always had to fight for their freedom. Life in the steppes was anything but peaceful. It was a constant struggle of wars. From the south, they faced raids by the Crimean Tatars and the Turks. From the west, they were oppressed by the Polish nobility, and from the north, the Tsars of Moscow kept an eye on them, eager to bring these free people under their rule. By the mid-17th century, the situation for the Cossacks had grown especially tense. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth then controlled vast territories stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Across these territories, efforts to reduce the Cossacks to the status of common peasants became increasingly frequent, forcing them to pay taxes, obey the nobles, and perform feudal duties. For the Cossacks, this was unbearable. Bogdan Khmelnytsky, one of the Cossack colonels, had a bitter dispute with Chiplinsky, the local governor of the town of Chigirin. Chiplinsky seized Bogdan's village Subotiv and looted it. According to legend, Chiplinsky's men beat Bogdan's son and took away the woman he lived with, never to be seen again. Khmelnytsky sought justice in court and even traveled to see the Polish king Vladislav IV, but found no support. The legend says the king merely smirked and replied, "You have your saber." Khmelnytsky went to the Zaporizhian Cossacks, where he quickly found support. His personal grievance resonated with the Cossacks' own exhaustion under the pressure of the Polish nobles. Within just a few months, large Cossack regiments were formed. They were soon joined by crowds of Ukrainian peasants who also longed to throw off the yoke of the Polish lords. Thus, in 1648 began what would go down in history as the Khmelnytsky Uprising. The first major battles shocked the Commonwealth. The Cossack forces, together with the Crimean Tatars, crushed several Polish armies in succession. Soon, all of eastern Ukraine was under Cossack control. After nearly a decade of war and hundreds of towns and villages burned to the ground, Poland was forced to sign a truce. To secure his gains, Khmelnytsky in 1654 pledged allegiance to the Tsar of Moscow. This is how the Cossack lands gradually came under Russian rule. At first, the Russian Tsar viewed the Cossack army as an independent, autonomous military force. However, over time, Russia began to demand greater loyalty and more faithful service from the Cossacks. Unwilling to accept this loss of freedom, the Cossacks rose up in rebellion. The largest of these uprisings were led by Razin in the 17th century and Pugachev in the 18th century. In response, the Russian authorities carried out harsh punitive actions, and eventually, under Empress Catherine the Great, the independence of the Zaporizhian Cossacks was abolished. But this didn't mean the end of Cossack history. The Cossacks now entered official military service under the Russian Emperor and were regularly sent to the most dangerous front lines of the many wars fought by the Russian Empire. Their new motto became, "For the faith, the Tsar and the fatherland." Cossack Corps, alongside the regular Russian army, took part in the wars against Napoleon and marched into Paris in 1814. They played an active role in the Russo-Turkish Wars, in the war against the mountain peoples of the North Caucasus, and they settled and developed the frontier lands along the coasts of the Azov and the Black Seas. Up until the early 20th century, they founded towns and fortresses and were recognized within the Russian Empire as a special social class, numbering around 3 million people. But not all Cossacks were the same. Over decades of perfecting their military skills, special units began to appear within the Cossack ranks. The bravest, strongest, and most capable fighters formed what could be called the Cossack Special Forces. These warriors were known as Plastuny. They served as scouts and trackers, saboteurs and sharpshooters. They had to master artillery and engineering, scale mountains with ease, and swim across rapid rivers. Plastuny could hit a target in the fog or the dark, guided only by sound. In close combat, both armed and unarmed, they had no equal. By the time of the First World War, the Cossacks had become fully integrated as a regular units within the Russian army. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, most Cossacks resisted the Bolsheviks, remaining loyal to the oath they had sworn to their emperor. As a result of the Russian Civil War, the Cossacks were brutally suppressed. According to various estimates, hundreds of thousands were executed. The new Soviet regime abolished and dismantled the Cossack estate as a social class. Thus ended the 500-year history of the free Slavic warriors. Today, the memory of the Cossacks lives on in Russia and Ukraine through historical festivals, parades, and ethnographic complexes. But not only in these countries. Many Cossacks who fled Soviet persecution settled in Western Europe, the United States, and Canada. Their descendants continue to honor their ancestors' legacy by maintaining museums and organizing events dedicated to Cossack heritage. Let us know in the comments what you think about the Cossacks. Have you heard of them before? Are there any places in your country or city connected to Slavic Cossack history? Among the South Slavs, in present-day Serbia, Croatia and Montenegro, there were also similar groups of warrior communities. They were known by different names: Granichari, Haiduks, Uskoks, and others. If you'd like a video about them, leave a comment below. Also, tell us which topics about Slavs you'd like to see on the channel. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe. And just a reminder, we are on Patreon. You can become a sponsor or a partner of the channel. Let's make this channel even better together. See you in the next video.